Game of Thrones is over, and the internet is in a tizzy, to put it mildly. Petitions are being signed, tweets are being tweeted, and thousands of videos and memes are being made. The reaction to this final season and the final episode seems to be overwhelmingly negative. So, why is that? The cinematography was beautiful. The music was outstanding. The costumes, set, hair, and makeup design were all incredibly well crafted. The CGI was impressive, and the acting, for the most part, was very well done. So why is the vast majority of the fandom so incensed? Well, it's a minor thing, really. Barely even worth mentioning, actually. But for the hell of it, let's name the bastard. The reason everyone is so goddamn angry is the writing. Now, you're a smart person. You already knew this was the issue. But let me suggest something a little more specific as the true cause of the historic Game of Thrones disaster of 2019. The writing wasn't bad. There is much worse writing on TV, but the writing, and on a larger scale the storytelling, no longer feels like it belongs in the world of Game of Thrones. And this is the true reason so many of us loyal fans have been alienated by Season 8 of Game of Thrones. It no longer feels like we're watching the same show. Let me give you a few examples to demonstrate what I mean. Pacing, themes, and characters. The pacing of Game of Thrones has always been unique as far as television series go. It is a character-driven drama. Yes, there are battles, there's sex, there's violence, there's big flashy explosions and dragons and all kinds of things that you'd expect to see on a popular TV show in this day and age. But despite all these flashy, traditional television-type moments, big wow visuals, scenes that get your heart racing and have you sitting on the edge of your seat, most of Game of Thrones is a couple of people talking to each other in a room. Or maybe outside. It's really that simple. And it's what makes Game of Thrones so special. Characters drive the story, and the pacing, the slow pacing specifically, allows us to get to know the characters on a level much deeper than we usually would get on a television show of this type. We learn everything about them. Their hopes, dreams, fears, ambitions, political views, ideals, unless of course the character is purposefully set up to be a mystery. We also see complex relationships develop, something that can only feel genuine and true when given the proper time to grow. Game of Thrones has historically been a master of pacing, and up until recent seasons never shied away from taking the slow route. We've been trained to expect a certain pace of character, relationship, and plot development just through watching the series. For better or for worse, we know how long it takes for things to happen in the world of Game of Thrones. When suddenly they change the way they've been telling the story for almost a decade and begin to speed up the pacing by a pretty significant amount, there is no other reaction the audience can have than to feel that the story is being rushed. Because, well, it is being rushed by the standards set by the showrunners themselves in the first 6 seasons. It's a pretty basic concept, but not one the showrunners seem to have considered. It's also pretty easy to understand why rushing the end of an epic, decade-long story might be upsetting for an audience, especially for a story so full of complex characters, Easter eggs, intertwining plots, and prophecies. We can look to a traditional 3-act narrative structure for some clarity on this issue. We get the setup, the background, the initial world building, and character development in Act 1. We get confrontation, rising action, and increased stakes in Act 2, and in Act 3 we get the crisis or climax and the denouement or resolution. These 3 acts are traditionally of a similar length, with the second act often being the longest, possibly as long as the first and third act put together. Where would we place the 8 seasons of Game of Thrones on a traditional narrative story arc? Well, since this is my video, here's how I would break it down. The first act of the show is very long by television standards. I would say the Red Wedding in the 9th episode of Season 3 is the climax of Act 1 and represents the transition from Act 1 into Act 2. That means Act 1 occurs over 26.5 hours of screen time. Act 2 builds with obstacles and descending action, reaching a big twist in the middle. I would say the death of Hodor fits well here. That would imply that the midpoint of Act 2 occurs in Episode 5 of Season 6. That's 23.7 hours from the beginning of Act 2 to the midpoint of Act 2. By traditional narrative storytelling standards, we could expect it to take another 24 hours or so to reach the climax of Act 2 and enter Act 3. The way the showrunners built the story in the TV show, we have the Long Night, the Battle of Winterfell, as the climax of Act 2, pushing us into the final build and the ultimate climax in Act 3 of the Battle of King's Landing and the following denouement or resolution. But here lies the problem. They only took 15 hours to get us from the midpoint of Act 2 to the climax of Act 2. That's only 63% of the length it should have been to feel natural and unrushed to us, the audience, based on the pacing they themselves set in the early seasons. And what about Act 3, which should generally be about as long as Act 1? From the aftermath of the Act 2 climax, the Battle of Winterfell, to the last moment of the last episode, we only get 4 hours. That's only 15% of the length it should have ideally been, if they were following their own standard of pacing. This is why the end of the show feels so incredibly rushed. The denouement occurs in only 80 minutes. That's only 1.7% of the total screen time of this series. Considering how many loose ends we have to wrap up, this was laughably insufficient. Not all television shows require this many hours to conclude the story in a satisfying way. But when you set an expectation over 10 years that the pacing of this show, that this world moves at a glacial pace by TV show standards, the lack of consistency in pacing of the climax and conclusion is going to feel rushed. Take away the slow-paced, character-driven storytelling of Game of Thrones, and you're left with something that feels an awful lot like shoddily thrown-together fanfiction. This is my first example of why the Game of Thrones final season just didn't feel like Game of Thrones anymore. There are many themes throughout Game of Thrones, and we could sit here for hours discussing each and every one of them. But I want to focus on the themes that really stood out to me as a viewer of the series: family, morality and honor, power, betrayal, and justice. Now, some of these themes did remain consistent in the final seasons. For example, betrayal was a primary focus of the final season, power again remained a powerful theme, and family was central to the final events of the story. But what about morality and honor, and justice? This is, to me, where D&D went a little off the rails. In the world of Game of Thrones, morality and honor are not traits that are rewarded. While we are influenced to like characters who are honorable and moral, like Ned Stark, for example, they don't end up on top. They are actually punished for possessing these traits. In the early seasons, we see this incredibly clearly. The good guys don't prevail. Those who are unable to play the Game of Thrones through cunning, calculated betrayal, and lies end up dead. But in the final season, morality and honor receive a very different treatment. Think of the characters left alive at the beginning of Season 8. Who pops into your mind as the most moral and honorable? For most of us, the character that comes to mind is probably Jon Snow. Whether he really is the most honorable and moral character or not, he is the one who is portrayed as such. We are told over and over again that he is moral and honorable, and unlike many aspects of the final season, we are also shown that side of him. But there are a few key actions that Jon Snow takes that could be considered immoral and dishonorable. The first example that comes to mind is his betrayal of Daenerys by telling his family of his heritage. This action is neither moral nor honorable. If you remove any outside impact it may have, the act itself sits in pretty neutral territory, neither good nor bad. But considering when you take an action, you have to be aware that your intentions are not the most important thing. The impact of your choices are just as important, if not more important. Things change just a little bit. He knew that in telling his family about his heritage, the woman he loved would be in danger, and he did it anyway, citing good intentions and the importance of family. But there's no reason why he couldn't tell his family about his true heritage at a later date, when the war was done, when things had settled down a little bit, when Daenerys wasn't in such danger, but he didn't. He was selfish, and in my mind, it was a dishonorable thing to do. He betrayed his queen. And what about her murder? Jon Snow murdered Daenerys Targaryen. He had his reasons, of course. He did believe that his actions would result in a better future for everyone. But he still murdered someone. Most people wouldn't consider murder honorable or moral, no matter the reason. Daenerys' kills are often brought up as the justification for her downfall, as foreshadowing to her becoming evil, the Mad Queen. They interpreted the fact that she had murdered people as her being immoral, a bad person. So why does the same not apply to Jon? Daenerys killed the Masters because they crucified children, so they would never do it again, and as a message to others who may consider taking similar action. Jon Snow killed Daenerys Targaryen so she would never burn another city to the ground. If the actions taken by Daenerys make her immoral, prior to the burning of King's Landing, of course, then the actions Jon Snow took should also be considered immoral. But what if it is the moral thing to do? What if the ends justify the means in this circumstance? In that case, Jon Snow should be punished for his actions, because as we've seen throughout Game of Thrones, morality and honor with a lack of foresight leads to death. We are constantly shown the connection between Jon Snow and his uncle Ned Stark, but it feels like a departure from the show we've grown to love that Jon Snow was not punished in a similar way as Ned Stark for his honorable yet obtuse actions. Morality and honor, and the fact that these traits do not necessarily make you a good or successful person in any world, but especially in the world of Game of Thrones, has been consistent throughout the seasons until season 8. When honor and morality is praised and rewarded, full stop. And this brings me to the theme of justice. Characters receive justice for their actions throughout the series. Good people are at the receiving end of justice when they make a mistake, and bad people are at the receiving end of justice when they do bad things and get caught. But in Season 8, we don't get that trademark Game of Thrones justice. Yes, Daenerys died after her slaughter of the people of King's Landing, and many would consider that justice. And as much as I don't like it, I can't disagree. But what about Jon Snow? Where is his justice for murdering his queen and betraying her? What about Tyrion? Where is his justice for betraying his queen? And no, serving as hand of the king is not justice no matter how you slice it, and neither is being sent to the Night's Watch, aka freedom, in the north. What about Cersei? Where was her justice? Dying in the rubble instantly and without presumably any pain whatsoever in the arms of the person she loves is not justice for the horrors she committed. Cersei sentenced her people to die when she brought them into the Red Keep, knowing full well that at least some of them would die as collateral damage, if not all of them, at the hands of Daenerys, or by way of the wildfire beneath the city. She blew up the Sept, killing hundreds of people and likely causing even more collateral damage throughout the city. She murdered her husband, she murdered Jon Arryn, but she did not get justice. And how about Arya? Arya has killed many people. She slaughtered the entire House Frey. She fed Walder Frey his own children in a pie. Maybe they deserved it, maybe not. But what about the serving girl whose face she was wearing when she committed these atrocities? Did she deserve to die? Did she participate in the Red Wedding? I doubt it. Arya receives no justice for any of the murders she has committed. She is in fact given the exact ending she hoped for: freedom and adventure with no responsibilities or titles. All of these ends for these characters feel disingenuous because they don't follow the rules of this story. You can't subvert expectations by just changing how an entire world works. The only way this show is compelling is if it exists in a fantasy world that is rich and complex and consistent enough that we can understand how the world functions and understand the characters within it. As soon as you start to change the fundamental aspects of a society or of a fictional world, it just doesn't feel real anymore. If Jon Snow could suddenly teleport, we would all feel confused. That's what happened to me in the final season. Watching so many characters go without justice felt like the writers were giving us a forced, faked, happy ending, inserted into a world where such an ending would be impossible. It's as though they sacrificed Daenerys so they wouldn't have to deliver justice to any other main character. And that's not satisfying to me, because that's not how Game of Thrones works. D&D shifted and morphed the way morality, honor, and justice function in this world to be more in line with our current day perceptions of morality, honor, and justice. I don't even think it was intentional, which makes it even more upsetting somehow. I think they just started writing from their own perspective and their own values as soon as they ran out of book material, and that's an issue, because our current day Western ideals of justice and morality and honor are very different from those in the mythical, medieval fantasy world of Game of Thrones. Writing a conclusion to this story from a modern day perspective just feels wrong. And now we arrive at arguably the best example of the writing veering away from our established world of Game of Thrones. The characters. Now, there are many issues that I have with the endings of many of the characters, and I am considering making dedicated videos, one character at a time, to explore that in further detail. But for now, I want to focus a little bit on the few main characters that I felt had the most severe case of character assassination: Tyrion Lannister, Jon Snow, and Daenerys Targaryen. Let's start with Tyrion. It's been said hundreds of times by myself and everyone else that Tyrion has lost a significant number of IQ points in this final season. Tyrion no longer feels like Tyrion. He's not witty, he's not cunning, he makes bad calls left and right, and trusts people he shouldn't and never would have in earlier seasons. He's become soft and he's become dumb. These changes don't feel like a natural progression. There's no reason for this regression. We're not given any kind of plausible explanation for why he would become this way. It just kind of happens. And it ends up feeling like they're just writing a completely different character who happens to look the same and have the same name as Tyrion Lannister. What about Jon? I used to love Jon. In the early seasons, he was an underdog. He loved his family, but he felt alienated from them. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but knew he would never get the respect he craved because he was a bastard. He felt isolated and alone. He joined the Night's Watch, faced horrors he'd never imagined, became the Lord Commander at a young age, and had to come to terms with power he'd never expected to have and wasn't ready to accept. He was betrayed by men he cared for and murdered, only to be brought back to life. He experienced a great number of losses, and in the process, he went from a complicated, multifaceted character with whom we could sympathize, a good man living in a cruel world, put in very difficult situations with no easy answer, to a man no longer able to make decisions or think through his choices on his own. He's no longer as intelligent as he once was, though he was never quite the thinker Tyrion had been. It's as though he met Daenerys and his whole character was turned into a cardboard cutout, one-dimensional version of himself. A plot device to move around the board, not a character. Once again, it feels as though we're writing a new character who just happens to look the same and have the same name. He's no longer himself, and it's frustrating as an audience to watch characters that we've grown to care about and love acting in ways that make no sense for their established values and behavioral patterns. And of course, there's Daenerys, another victim of character assassination, built up over seasons as a complicated woman at battle with herself, fighting off her demons, overcoming her natural tendency to temper and vengeance, with her compassion, caring, and fierce protection of those who need it. She was one of the most well-rounded, complex, deeply relatable female characters I've ever seen on television. And once again, her character was stripped down to the bare bones, her values sucked out, and in their place, we were given stereotypes, tropes, and nonsensical actions. I have a video in the works in which I'm going to go into further detail into Daenerys' character and why she should have never become the Mad Queen, at least not in the television show, and why I believe Cersei would have been a far better fit to fill the shoes of a Mad Queen for the finale of this series. But for now, I think you get the idea. Many of our beloved characters were turned into hollow plot devices to be used to push the story towards the big, flashy battles, the explosions, the fire, the death, the shock, and the awe. The show morphed from a character-driven drama where the story is told through extensive dialogue and deep character exploration into a blockbuster movie on CGI steroids. Beautiful CGI, don't get me wrong, but still CGI steroids. But the final seasons were written for the lowest common denominator. We got action film Game of Thrones, and that's never what Game of Thrones was supposed to be. So where does that leave us? I don't know about you, but I've felt incredibly empty inside since the airing of the final episode. Game of Thrones has had a significant presence in my life for almost a decade. I've grown to care about many of the characters. I felt strongly about the events of the show and had hopes and dreams for how it would end. I feel the need to reiterate that it's not really about how it ended so much as how we got there. It's not the destination, it's the journey. And the journey took us to a place that couldn't possibly exist in Westeros or anywhere in this world that G.R.R. Martin created. That, to me, is the biggest issue with the finale of Game of Thrones. It wasn't Game of Thrones at all. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos from me on Game of Thrones and many other television series and movies. Leave any requests for specific topics you want me to cover in the comments down below, and I'll see you very soon in my next video.